how does one do both MBA and a fast-growing tech startup at the same time?
Well, my first semester grades were terrible. That was the truth. Like I think I almost had to drop out of my first semester at school just because I was barely in class and was not doing my homework. I eventually got my grades together and I did graduate with honors.
Welcome back to Pine Speaker Series. Today we have Christine all the way from New York City to Singapore. And we're going to talk about her career, her starting venture capital fund, and her experience at U.S. government, and her views on the future of government and defense tech.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Christine Keung. I'm a general partner at J2 Ventures. And we are early stage dual use technology investment fund. I started my career as a Fulbright scholar working for the US Department of State in China, and had the once in a lifetime opportunity to go and actually work at Dropbox as one of their early employees. And so was one of the first hires on the trust and security team at Dropbox, and which launched kind of my career working in high growth companies like Fountain and Figma after. I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2020, and rather than going back into the private sector, I ended up working in government. I was the chief data officer for the city of San Jose, so the capital of Silicon Valley in California, as well as the Small Business Administration.
So Christine, how long were you at Dropbox before you moved to Fountain?
Yeah, so I was there for 2.5 years. So joined right before Series B, was with the company right before the IPO. And Dropbox was such an amazing experience because I was one of the first hires on the trust and security team, and joined as the company was already serving over 500 million users worldwide, but we were still a small company of less than 1,000 employees. And we were kind of the classic case study of virality. Like every single day we went and we were basically seeing our user growth double and triple every single day. Right. And it was all around the world. We were there when I don't know if GDPR is like interesting to people, but basically was working at Dropbox when a Austrian student sued Facebook successfully in the Irish Supreme Court, and then he overturned this data sharing provision called Safe Harbor. And Dropbox actually had a huge European presence, and so there was a period of time when we didn't even know if we were operating like a legal business. And that's actually the really fun part of working in these like high growth companies is you are sort of navigating the complexity alongside the governments, and you are finding ways to serve your serve your users, right, and deliver your products irregardless of kind of like the policies, right? And oftentimes I actually think a lot of these tech companies with the scale like Dropbox, we end up shaping and informing policy as well. So that was just a really, really fun time to be working there, right? And obviously we eventually kind of learned about this thing called the GDPR. It's the big European privacy regulation. And I think when you are a platform that big, right, which is bigger than most nation states, your platform policy ends up becoming almost like nation state policy, right? Like you end up kind of informing, like you have to spend a lot of time thinking about like access and data retention. And even when foreign governments request the data of Dropbox users, you actually hold a lot of power in terms of like determining how to handle these situations. So it was really, really interesting to kind of be there as we were making those decisions. And then, and I started off as an individual contributor, but eventually got an internal promotion to become chief of staff at Dropbox. We were, in addition to just growing like crazy, dealing with, global data regulations, we were also getting ready to go public at the time. And so I had an opportunity to become chief of staff to the general counsel at Dropbox and internally started working on our IPO. So that was just honestly an incredible, incredible experience. And I think really set the foundation for me to at least like understand kind of what good looks like, especially in early stage companies. And I've really used that experience then to inform the next couple like high growth roles that I've taken.
After China, after Dropbox, you were at Fountain, and this thing called gig economy really, really exploded. So
yeah,
what was your experience like being in the middle of that explosion of gig economy, and why move from Dropbox to Fountain?
Yeah. So I feel like what's always driven me, right, to take a new role is always like I tend to take like a macro lens to everything I do. You also know this. I worked at Bridgewater, so there's a little bit of that bias here, right? Where I always think about I like to think a lot about kind of like where I think the world is heading, right? I think Dropbox, was a really interesting opportunity where I sort of kind of rode kind of like the cloud storage wave, right? And like what really compelled me about Fountain was that was sort of the rise of mobile enabled marketplaces. That was really the beginning. I mean, Fountain was started in 2015. The founders, Jeremy Kai and Key For You, went through Y Combinator in 2015. And actually, a lot of their early angel investors were early employees at Dropbox. So there was some connectivity there. But what was so interesting about Fountain was it was a company that was always growing just as quickly and growing with companies that were becoming basically unicorns overnight. I remember one of our early customers was Deliveroo, right? Deliveroo became the very first UK unicorn. It was a delivery app that not even later, I mean, just got bought by DoorDash, right? I think for at least $3 billion. And then we also I actually remember we were also early partners to a company called Lime Bike, right? I don't know if you have Lime in Singapore, but they're everywhere in the United States. And Lime actually became, I think, the fastest company to become unicorn status. And so Fountain was the hiring platform for these insanely, fast growing companies. And in the process of like helping them scale the services side of the business, right, essentially onboard all of their fractional workers, I mean, we kind of found ourselves in the middle of labor policy, right? Like the way we designed our platform, the way we partnered with these companies in onboarding workers actually shifted the labor force. And what really drew me to join Fountain back in 2017 is because I had this intuition that we are moving into a state of the world where the majority of the U.S. labor market was going to become fractional. And that has actually proven true. So even right now in the United States, this is the first time in history where over 1/3 of the U.S. labor force is fractional. So so we're starting, and that was only over the span of less than 10 years, right? That you've seen this kind of huge demographic change. So that was such a fascinating time to kind of be there. It was also really fun to join the company at Series A because you are, like, I was the 11th employee at Fountain. And it was just drinking from a fire hose in terms of having to kind of do everything, right? Especially when you're like the first business hire, you're basically there like building out the go-to-market function, building out sales ops, building out data analytics. I hired our first office manager. I actually remember like even just like we were early. It was also really fun because we were early adopters of a lot of other multi-billion-dollar companies. So we were actually one of the first customers at Brex.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's just like a lot of really fun things about being able to go a little earlier and then growing with other high growth partners. And then from Fountain, the next role I took was Figma. And it is actually really fun to now say that because Figma obviously had a really successful IPO. And I was working at Figma all throughout business school.
What were you doing at Figma? And this was while you were at HBS?
Yes. So Figma, I was there also really early. I think it was Series A. And I've known Dylan just a couple of years just through like the Teal Fellow network. And at Figma, I was one of their first security hires. And so with Figma, it was really helping them with their enterprise go-to-market motion and helping them close that first set of enterprise customers. Basically making sure that their internal data security and their internal data security posture was ready for these large enterprise contracts. What was so fun about working at least at Fountain and Figma when they were still Series A companies, right? And is actually working with them to close the first 3 to 5 large enterprise customers. Because that's just something that you can't take for granted, right? Like it is not a small thing. Like at least when I was at Fountain, I remember I actually spent my birthday weekend working on our Walmart contract. And then at Figma, I remember like what a big deal it was when Figma closed Microsoft when we were still like a Series A company.
So if I am the first business person at these fast-growing tech startups and your job is to work on the basics of sales, client engagement, contracts, negotiations. How does one go from zero enterprise client to fairly large, big name client, which makes a whole big difference in terms of your next client. So you've done it a few times at both Fountain and Figma, and what are some lessons learned there?
Yeah, and we actually did this at Dropbox too. I think what's been really interesting is actually seeing how the landscape has changed. I think it has never been easier for smaller software companies to sell into large enterprises today. And the reason why I say this is because 10 years ago, when I was first starting out at Dropbox, right? Dropbox was still pre-revenue. It was still very much a consumer app. The way we were getting into enterprises was through a sales motion called shadow IT. Shadow IT is basically just when you build a fabulous free consumer app and people find ways to bypass their company's enterprise security controls and just download Dropbox on the desktop anyways. That was Shadow IT. It was immensely effective because honestly, back then Dropbox was like the easiest to use and best cloud storage app, right? Like I think
I'm still using it. Yeah. Although we run
paying for it.
Yeah, we run everything on Google Enterprise, but I still use Dropbox.
Okay, I'm happy to hear that.
And I'm paying for it. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm happy. I'm glad to know that. I think the monetization team would be happy to hear that. Over 10 years ago, that was how Dropbox eventually closed their first set of enterprise relationships. It was because the IT teams realized that their users were going to use it anyways, and so they might as well start paying for Dropbox just so they can get enterprise control. So it was very much reverse engineering. Nowadays, I think it's a lot harder to do that. But for smaller companies, typically have to go through pretty arduous like compliance and security reviews to sell to large companies, right? Back then in the Dropbox days, everything was done very manually. It was these like gigantic, Excel spreadsheets that you kind of have to fill out. And obviously you have to kind of make sure that you had the internal product capabilities and internal controls to meet those requirements. What I've actually seen now over the last 10 years, and it's really starting with Fountain, is the productization of a lot of these security controls. So Fountain was actually an early customer of a multi-billion-dollar company called Vanta, but Fountain was like one of the early design partners when Vanta was going through YC. The founder of Vanta, Christina, was actually a product manager at Dropbox and one of my former colleagues. And so what Vanta does that was really clever, right, is it basically automates that security control, right? And Figma eventually used Vanta as well. So the reason why I bring that up is because it's one thing if you were a Series B Dropbox already worth, I think it was already privately valued at $10 billion, right? You can hire some of the best internal auditors in the world. You can bring on your accounting firms. But when you're a Series A company, you can't have those same capabilities. And so now when you're able to automate some of that using software, it makes it a lot easier for you to sell to large enterprises.
So doing MBA HBS is intense as it is. How does one do both MBA and a fast-growing tech startup at the same time?
Well, my first semester grades were terrible. That was the truth. Like I think I almost had to drop out of my first semester at school just because I was barely in class and was not doing my homework. I eventually got my grades together and I did graduate with honors, but my first semester was like rough because it is actually really hard to do both. But I actually felt like going into business school was sort of like a break from, because it's not like building and operating at a high growth company is very, very intense. And so I think in some ways like business school was almost more of like a vacation or a break or an exposure to something different. And so I had a lot of fun doing both.
So yeah, let's talk about J2 Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you meet with your partners? How did you make up your mind that you want to try this investing full time?
So I sat next to Alex in class at Harvard Business School. And so meeting him was really easy, and we obviously we hit it off, and he's one of my closest friends from school, and we had always talked about wanting to do something together. Alex has a very different background from me though. So I went into business school with more of a high growth venture backed operating background versus Alex has he entered from military service. So he actually was still working for the Department of Defense, working for the Defense Innovation Unit while he was in business school. And I think he and I also kind of bonded because we were both like working for companies or working for other organizations while we were in school. So that was how I met Alex, and that was sort of the inception of J2. It is a 4-person general partnership. We currently manage about $300 million across 2 funds, but Hector, as I had mentioned, we just closed our oversubscribed 3rd fund, our Brookhaven fund, and we also simultaneously closed an infrastructure fund as well. So that's been really exciting. And we invest in early stage, pre-seed and seed, sometimes Series A companies that are developing cutting edge technologies that can be used by the government. So we invest in what's called dual use technologies. So companies that have both government and national security applications as well as private sector applications.
Because I'm also running a venture fund, there has been a lot of stigma and concerns around funds that emerged during COVID times. 2020 vintage, 2021 vintage, there's a lot of concerns around the COVID level valuation when interest rate was near zero. And many managers are suffering from that in terms of exits, down rounds, write-offs. As far as I know, J2 had an early success in early funds. So maybe tell us from the days that you were setting it up as SPVs, you were advising, and then how did you decide to, okay, let's set up a proper fund structure, and then how were you able to have so many early success in your fund 1, which was born probably during COVID times?
Yeah, so I was still working government during, we really call that Fund 0. So like it was really Alex and John setting up SPVs to test out the thesis. And you'll kind of notice that with, we don't even know what to call, we call that one Fund 0 because we call Argonne, our institutional fund, Fund 1. When you're first starting out, I think in anything, you always have to have a proof of concept to basically prove out that your unique strategy or your unique thesis works, right? And I would say like one thing that's really helped out on the performance side is we've always been very, very specific about our unique approach and our value add, right? Like my partners and I are very good at underwriting government markets. Like we focus on helping companies access non-dilutive capital and helping them get their first government contract. And so I think, and we've actually turned down a lot of great investments where they're just simply out of scope, right? Like one of the things that we always ask ourselves during our ICs is why J2, right? And I think if we can't answer that crisply, right, and we can't be concrete in how we're helpful, we have actually chosen to kind of step back and allow the founders to make room for investors that are most strategic. But our best performing companies are the ones where it was always so clear from day one why we could help and why we could help disproportionately. So it's something that keeps us very disciplined and keeps us very rigorous, and I guess it kind of mitigates adverse selection.
In terms of deep tech, and also government procurement, and also having commercial viability, these are all something that probably from the consumer tech side they don't usually think about. So having had your career built around consumer tech, how was your transition into more of government procurement and these type of deep tech type of investments?
Yeah, so I am trying to actually bridge the two, right? Like I don't see them as opposing. I actually don't see them as opposing forces at all. I actually think some of the best technologies that could be used by government should have sort of the rigor and philosophies, especially around user experience, right, that consumer technologies do. I could just give a specific example within our portfolio. So one of our first investments just to prove out this thesis and specifically prove out the way we think about government tech and defense tech, right? Because we're very non-traditional defense tech investors. We don't actually touch pure play defense companies. Like every single company we invest in have to have meaningful commercial traction or commercial market. But one of the first investments we made just to prove out the thesis of the fund is the Oura ring, which I don't know if you saw. Yes, you're wearing the Oura. Also, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, Bloomberg actually broke the news. Oura just raised at an $11 billion valuation. So Oura is actually a really great example of how we like to add strategic value as an investor. So Oura is obviously a very popular consumer application. We were actually the ones who helped the Oura ring break into kind of the DoD market. So this is, I think, all public now. The Oura actually has a very, very large contract with the Department of Defense. The Air Force actually uses Oura for remote patient monitoring. So even during the pandemic, like on Air Force bases, the Oura is so sensitive, right, at detecting your respiratory patterns that it usually knows when you're sick before you do. And so if you think about this from like a public health perspective, right, especially on a military base, this now allows physicians to be able to monitor like a patient population and to be proactive in isolating folks who may have COVID. So that's actually just one very simple application of how like the DoD is using the Oura.
If I could double click into that, Aura being, obviously I see it more from the consumer angle, but how did you evaluate the viability that this could go into DoD? Because I'm sure there are thousands of these type of companies and products that are trying to get into DoD, but where did you see the spark that this could be the one?
Yeah. First of all, Oura is deep tech, right? Like the founders of Oura, they have PhDs from a top university in Finland. Like it's not just because the experience is consumer doesn't mean that their technology is extremely sophisticated, right? Especially in such a small form factor. They think like the fact that they're able to provide the level of data and provide that level of monitoring is extremely sophisticated. And so Oura actually has received non-dilutive funding, I think, from the Finnish government, just through their research labs, even prior to them eventually coming into the United States, having Serena Williams be their angel investor, and then now becoming into working with the DoD. In fact, Matt was the founding chief medical officer of the DIU, so and is a physician by training. And so when you spend time with government buyers, you have you just have an intimate understanding of kind of what their needs are. But I would say what we really try to do as venture capitalists is help the government buyers at least understand all the different types of technologies that could meet that same need, right? So we knew that the Air Force has been interested in some type of technology solution for remote patient monitoring, right? I think if you watch Top Gun, right, one of the scenes that they show is pilots actually get very dizzy at high altitudes. And so having a technology solution that could actually detect that dizziness is critical, right, in that context. And so, but we were the ones who, like, I think what we're very good at is being a bit more creative in terms of the tech solutions that could actually meet that need. And so healthcare represents about a third of our portfolio. And healthcare for us, like we do have a very strong thesis around like remote patient monitoring, right? So Oura is one of our later stage investments. Another example of a company that is doing something similar is an earlier stage company called Lumia Health. So Lumia Health, actually founded by a Korean American entrepreneur, Daniel Lee, is building the world's first in-ear wearable that measures blood flow to the brain. And this is a company that, if you go on their website, it's very pink. It shows a lot of women wearing it and exercising. And it has a very similar go-to-market motion to Oura in the sense that it's not a medical device yet. It is a consumer wearable that is direct to consumer. So you could actually just order a Lumia device now. And it's helping people with rare neurological diseases, right? So dysautonomia, POTS, even long COVID, which isn't rare anymore, unfortunately, right? And many of them are actually women, right? So when you kind of experience like sudden dizzy spells, Lumia is basically helping the patients, but also their caregivers manage these symptoms. And they have received a lot of non-dilutive capital from the Air Force because Air Force pilots have also been diagnosed with these rare neurological diseases. The New York Times recently did an expose around how Air Force pilots have been diagnosed with dysautonomia, and we don't actually know the root cause. And so the motivations behind investing in this company is to actually create perhaps like the first longitudinal data set, right, around blood flow to the brain that could potentially lead to the clinical breakthroughs we need to treat illnesses that just have no cure right now. Like one of our companies, SoFi Biotherapeutics, which is making stem cell derived red blood cells, right? So SoFi is basically developing the capabilities to biomanufacture your red blood cells. This is a company where we actually not just led their seed round, we just took their entire seed round. So we gave them $5 million of dilutive venture capital. And if you Google the press release for SAFI, we were actually able to share that the Department of Defense gave them $14 million of non-dilutive capital. So they technically raised functioning $20 million, right? But only took $5 million of dilution. And so that is sort of a perfect example of the J2 thesis. When we are diligencing companies, we are making investment offers with the confidence that many of our companies, especially the deep tech companies, can get comparable levels of either government revenue or non-dilutive capital. And even in the process of actually raising and closing our third fund, we were actually able to show to our LPs that across our entire portfolio, so this is averaged, for every single dollar of dilutive capital raised, our companies have been able to raise at least $2 of matching non-dilutive capital.
Wow.
So that really does change, it really does actually change kind of the risk profiles of a lot of our deep tech investments. But I think it also changes kind of the founder calculus, right, when it comes to valuation and ownership. Because typically, I think founders will push for a higher valuation, mostly just because they want to retain as much ownership as possible.
Christine, I really enjoyed the conversation, especially as you just touched down in Singapore a few hours ago and fighting with jet lag. Every time that you meet you, you have just this incredible amount of energy and just sheer the intellectual conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope the rest of your Asia trip goes well.
Thank you so much, Hector. Honestly, we could have done this for like hours. We ran way over time. I don't know how long this podcast will end up being, but honestly, we could have just gone on for hours and hours. So hopefully I get a chance to do this with you again.
Okay, thank you.